have a critical question for the editors at DC Comics. How did your art go from great art like this from Tom Grummett to hot garbage like this?
Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online booksellers everywhere today.
How low are the standards going to fall at DC Comics before they hit rock bottom? Because when I looked at the new Tim Drake Robin #1, I had to shake my head because this comic is a major fall from grace when you consider the kind of comic they were producing back in 1993. Now, back in 1993, your Robin #1 launched with a very fantastic creative team of Chuck Dixon, who is a legendary comic book writer, Tom Grummett, who is a master of art, and an inker, Scott Hanna, who just did a fantastic job of making Tom Grummett's art pop. And this team reintroduced everybody to Tim Drake in his first ongoing solo series, and I bought the gold foil variant cover of this book from a comic vendor on Fordham Road back in '93, and that book is a major part of my collection. And it made me shake my head when I saw this monstrosity calling itself Tim Drake Robin #1 for 2022, because this showed a complete decline in standards at DC Comics. Now, this cover itself looks really rough and really doesn't pop like the '93 cover does. And this cover, sadly, the art is pretty terrible, but it just is a major part of a bait and switch. Now, what comic companies like to do these days is they like to go out here and they like to put a really dynamic cover on a comic to get your attention. Unfortunately, that cover isn't the same as what's going on in the interiors, which feature some incredibly inferior art. And this comic follows that ongoing trend that really bugs me with comics, because this comic has this cover that's supposed to be really dynamic. Unfortunately, once you get to the interiors, the art just completely collapses in terms of quality. Now, on one of these panels, I have to ask the question on this panel right here, what happened to Tim Drake's mouth? I mean, you have this art that's absolutely terrible, and the artist just doesn't even have the time to go out here and finish details like the character's mouth. I mean, it's really bad when you have a character that doesn't even look anything like the model for Tim Drake, or doesn't even resemble anything similar to a Robin. Now, I remember buying the '93 Robin series, and one of the things they did to make Tim Drake distinct was they feathered out his hair to kind of make it look like he was a Robin or a red bird in real life. And that was one of the things they did to make Tim distinct from Dick or Jason. And instead of going out here and giving Tim something that would make him pop as a character in his personal and his secret identity, we get this soy-filled looking character that looks like something out of a bad scholastic YA novel with some very horrific proportions as related to his body. Now, this art, again, is just some of the worst I've seen, and one of the reasons why we have this really terrible art, I believe, is because your DC doesn't want to go out here and pay a lot of the more talented veteran artists the price that they deserve to go out here and put in the work on a DC comic. And I find that to be really sad, because you have DC Comics, which is supposed to be a division of a multi-billion-dollar organization like Discovery, and they should easily be able to pay the higher rates of quality artists. And these page rates, they range anywhere from about $100 to $200 a page. And you think DC Comics should have no problem going out here and paying that price for a quality creative team. But no, instead of going out here and paying for a quality creative team, we get them going out here and looking to try to pay $50 a page to a guy on Fiverr. And this is the kind of art you get from guys on Fiverr. And it's embarrassing to look at the composition of these figures. I mean, you have bodies with misproportioned feet and misproportioned torsos. And this is, again, embarrassing work to look at, because if an amateur came to a Comic-Con with this kind of art, I guarantee you that back in the day, that person would have been rejected. But somehow, these kinds of Fiverr-type artists are getting on major publications, and they're putting out some of the worst work as related to the comic book medium. And again, it's embarrassing that a multi-billion-dollar company like DC Comics is allowing pages like this to come out of their editorial and allowing these misproportioned figures to come out on their pages and represent their characters. I mean, it's a sad day when an independent publisher like myself will go out here and hire professional talent and make sure that the art is up to a standard, but a multi-billion-dollar corporation like DC Comics is allowing art like this to come out and say that it's professional. I mean, every page of this Tim Drake Robin book is, again, absolutely embarrassing. Again, what happened to Dude's mouth? And he's holding a hamburger, but what happened to his mouth? What happened to his mouth over here? And again, I'm looking at the proportions on these figures, and look at what is with Dude's neck over here. I mean, seriously, you have proportions that are absolutely just, again, far below the standards that your DC Comics used to demand of people like myself back in the day. And here they are going out here and accepting these as supposed standards, and it just makes me shake my head looking at this so-called comic book, because the art is, again, just absolutely far below standard. I mean, the art on this Tim Drake Robin book is just horrible, and again, your Riley Rossmo, this is just not a quality book from him. And your Megan Fitzmartin, when I was reading this story, this is the woman who decided that Tim Drake was supposedly changing his sexual orientation, and I already went in depth on her in another video and how Editorial should have checked this woman. But as I see it, your DC Editorial is the big problem with these comics, because your DC Editorial doesn't have any sort of house standards, and because your DC Editorial doesn't have any sort of house standards, we're getting trash like this instead of a masterpiece like this. I mean, if we look at Robin #1 from 1993, look at how bold and dynamic this art is. Look at how the splash page just really pops. We have John Paul Valley, the Azrael Batman, holding up Tim Drake, and again, opening up with a strong story in the aftermath of Nightfall. And we have the tension in this page. Again, Dixon is a master storyteller, and Tom Grummett really makes the art pop and really builds the tension in just 2 to 3 pages. Again, fantastic work from the creative team here. But this creative team, if I were an editor at DC Comics, would be straight out of here, because again, this art is it's again something out of a bad Scholastic YA novel, and I'm looking at the proportions on these bodies, and again, this is just far below standard, because this just does not fit the characters. It doesn't fit a style. And what really irritates me about this is you have one art style on Batman, you have one art style on Detective Comics, you have another art style on Nightwing, and then you have another art style on Tim Drake Robin. And if you're running a comic publishing company, all of the art styles need to be consistent with each other, because if all of these characters are in the same universe, then we need all of the art styles to fit within each other, and we need all of the art styles to remain consistent, so you could go out here and see everything be the same from book to book to book. Yes, your artists are going to have creative license with their styles here and there, but the whole thing is everybody's following the house style and the house standard, and I don't see that here with the Tim Drake Robin, where we see that, again, his body looks really, again, misproportioned, and when you compare that to Nightwing, where Tim Drake makes appearances, or Batman, or Detective Comics, you just don't see any synergy or consistency with each of these books. And again, this art style it's just absolutely horrible. I mean, again, he's got really long legs and a really short torso in this panel, and in another panel we've got the proportions are off again. I mean, all of this is, again, not really flowing dynamically with other Bat books in the DC universe. And the design on the cape goes from a scallop cape at the bottom in one page to this smooth one here. And again, all of this is just showing that that the artist really has not been given good art direction by Editorial, and that's what's making this book to be one of the worst at DC Comics. But these bad comics are not the issue of creators. No, I'm not going to give the artists and the writers too much of a hard time. This is an editorial issue, and when you have an editor who really doesn't hold your creators to a standard, you get a substandard comic like this. And again, it's embarrassing for a multi-billion-dollar corporation like DC Comics to allow a comic this bad to be published under their brand, and it just shows how weak the leadership is at DC Comics under Discovery Time Warner. Now, I'm hoping that David Zaslav goes out here and cleans house at DC Comics, because it's comics like this that that lower the value of the intellectual property, and it's comics like this that alienate the few remaining comic fans out there, and it's comics like this that lead to many comic fans just throwing up their hands and walking away, because it's really embarrassing when you have a comic company where your independent publishers like myself can go out here and produce something like this, like John Haynes at Death's Door. I mean, it's really embarrassing. I'm going to try to bring it up. But when somebody like myself can go out here and bring out something like a John Haynes at Death's Door and do this in my own home, again, this is really embarrassing. And again, it's embarrassing because here's the art that I went out here and hired Antonio Balderi to do for me. And again, you think that somebody like DC Comics would go out here and hire talent from the indies and go out here and try to fire somebody who's quality out here. But instead of going out here and hiring quality artists or quality talent, no, what your DC Comics goes out here and does is try to scrape the bottom of the barrel, hoping to maximize profits on their comics. But you're not maximizing profits. All you're doing is alienating people with these horrifically bad-looking comics, and all you're doing is making people realize, hey, maybe I should not go out here and buy DC Comics. And when I look at this book, again, it's an utter disappointment, because I remember how great Tim Drake's Robin was, and I remember how fantastic this book was back in '93 when I was in college, and I remember counting down the days to picking up this book, and it's just sad to see Tim Drake being done dirty by DC Comics, which says, hey, we don't know what to do with this character. Well, if I were writing this character, I would be following what Chuck Dixon laid out in his plans, which was to make Tim Drake want to be a great detective like Batman, and make most of his stories focused on solving mysteries and going out here and looking to go out here and work on cases on his own. I mean, Chuck Dixon seemed to have the Bat books in line back in the 90s. I mean, he had Robin, Nightwing, and Birds of Prey flowing like water. But sadly, DC sits there and tells us we don't know what to do with Robin because they want to shoehorn your Damian Wayne in the role of Robin. But Tim Drake is somebody who could be out here being a detective, being in the Robin role, because I've always said that when I saw him created back in '89, I said, you know, Tim Drake could be Robin for the next 25 or 30 years without a problem, because his character was just well crafted, and him aspiring to be a detective would be a great series to run. And Chuck Dixon did a great job laying out that foundation, and had DC had good editors in charge, we would still see more stories of Tim learning how to become the successor to the world's greatest detective, and that would be the direction that the character could be put in. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of people like your Megan Fitzmartin looking to turn Tim Drake into a representative of the alphabet identity politics, and instead of them focusing on Tim being aspiring to be the world's greatest detective, or the second world's greatest detective, or the successor to the world's greatest detective, we get a hot mess of a comic like this, which is an embarrassment. And when I look at this comic, we now have a contender for the second worst comic to Dynamite's John Wick #2, and it is absolutely embarrassing to see, again, people who have more money than me, and it's me working on a shoestring budget. I can produce a comic like John Haynes at Death's Door, but your DC Comics with millions of dollars can't produce a comic of this level of quality. And again, that's an embarrassment to DC Comics. Now, this is one of the worst comics I have ever seen in my life. And again, the standards have fallen so badly at DC Comics that I'm deeply disappointed at what they're putting in their comics and calling comic books, because I know they can do better. But sadly, nobody at DC Comics wants to do better because they put agenda over story, and this is what happens when you put agenda over story. Now, if you want to pick up some of my action-packed African-American fantasy fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them on Smashwords, the iBook Store, and Google Play. And if you want to help me make my second comic, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.